For years, the financial media has spun a compelling narrative for Millennials and Gen Z, the promise of the largest windfall in human history. It's been dubbed the Great Wealth Transfer, a colossal $124 trillion tsunami of boomer wealth supposedly set to flow directly into the pockets of the next generation. But the evidence is now in, and the reality is starkly different, that money is not destined for you. A closer look at data from the Federal Reserve and healthcare sectors reveals that this promised inheritance is being systematically siphoned off to cover exorbitant end-of-life care costs, predatory debt, and institutional rent-seeking. The Great Wealth Transfer is not a transfer at all, it is a meticulously engineered wealth extraction. Today, we will pull back the curtain on the real numbers fueling the silver economy, expose the brutal financial plumbing of the long-term care industry, and reveal how private equity is methodically hollowing out the American middle class to construct a permanent renter nation. My name is Nick, and you're watching Coinball Finance. To fully grasp the sheer magnitude of this illusion, we must first understand where the wealth actually resides and who is truly positioned to inherit it. The headline story claims that older Americans control approximately 61% of all national wealth, a sum reaching into the tens of trillions of dollars. The consulting firm Cerulli Associates recently projected that $124 trillion will be transferred by 2048. Hearing a figure that immense, it's easy to assume that a rising tide will lift all boats. But let's examine the actual distribution. According to the Federal Reserve's most recent data, the wealthiest 10% of households hold over 67% of the total household wealth in the nation. In stark contrast, the bottom 50% of households possess a mere 2%. Therefore, when we discuss a $124 trillion wealth transfer, the crucial question is, who is actually doing the transferring? The devastating truth lies buried within the industry's own reports. An astounding half of the entire wealth transfer will originate from just the top 2% of households. Yes, 50% of this historic transfer will come from a tiny 2% sliver of the population. The wealthiest 10% of households are set to receive 56% of all intergenerational transfers, while the entire bottom half of the population will receive just 8%. The media loves to highlight the average inheritance, which hovers around $700,000. But this figure is profoundly misleading, as an average is easily distorted by a few billionaires passing down massive estates. When you look at the median inheritance for the bottom 50% of Americans, the figure plummets to less than $10,000. And according to labor economist Teresa Ghilardici, if you exclude the wealthiest 10% of Americans, the median inheritance for the remaining 90% is effectively zero. Between 70 and 80% of U.S. households will never receive any significant inheritance whatsoever. Younger generations have been sold a false promise, leading many to make life decisions based on a windfall that is structurally designed never to materialize. And the reason it cannot materialize is that the American system has constructed a formidable interception mechanism, specifically designed to drain the balance sheets of the middle class long before the owner even passes away. Imagine the middle-class family home as a long-term savings account. For the majority of Americans, home equity constitutes the vast bulk of their generational wealth. In a healthy, functioning society, that equity would eventually pass to the next generation, providing a crucial down payment for a home or a vital safety net for the future. But the U.S. healthcare system is not a normal, functioning society. It operates like a machine, perfectly calibrated to strip this equity down to the bare studs. The primary engine of this extraction is the long-term care industry. According to the Department of Health and Human Services, roughly 70% of Americans over the age of 65 will require some form of long-term care. A common misconception is that Medicare will cover this expense. It does not. Medicare covers precisely 0 days of custodial, non-medical long-term care. While it might cover up to 100 days in a skilled nursing facility following a qualifying hospital stay, the moment you reach day 101, you are entirely on your own. And being on your own is terrifyingly expensive. According to the latest Genworth Cost of Care survey, the national median cost for a private room in a nursing home has now reached $127,750 per year. And in some states, like Alaska, that average skyrockets to over $364,000 annually. With the average stay in long-term care lasting approximately 5 years, a typical family is confronted with a bill well over $300,000. The median U.S. household net worth is also roughly $300,000. This means a single, average stay in a nursing home can mathematically obliterate the entire net worth of a median American family. Before a single dollar can reach the next generation, the inheritance is gone. So, what happens when the savings are depleted? This is where the brutal mechanics of the Medicaid spend down come into play. Medicaid is the government safety net that does cover long-term care, but it comes with a devastating catch. To qualify for Medicaid in most states, a single senior must first spend down their total countable assets to just $2,000. You might assume you can simply gift your assets to your children, using the IRS annual gift tax exemption of $19,000. However, that federal tax exemption is irrelevant to Medicaid eligibility, and attempting to do so will trigger severe penalties. Medicaid enforces a strict 5-year look-back period. If officials see that you transferred assets within 60 months of applying, they will impose a penalty period, delaying your coverage. You are legally compelled to systematically liquidate your retirement accounts, sell your investments, and exhaust your entire life savings, paying the nursing home out of pocket at inflated private pay rates. Only when you have been bled down to your final $2,000 will the state finally intervene. And even then, the state doesn't forget the debt. Through a hidden clawback mechanism known as Medicaid estate recovery, the state can place a lien on the family home after the recipient's death to recoup the costs of their care. The family home, the primary engine of middle-class generational wealth, is routinely liquidated to satisfy these government bills. The wealth isn't just disappearing. It's being intercepted. Now, before we connect these dots directly to the private equity firms orchestrating this extraction, we need to discuss your financial security. The system is structurally engineered to strip wealth from the middle class. To protect your family's assets, you must understand the macroeconomic forces working against you before they arrive at your doorstep. That is precisely why you should subscribe to the free Coin Bureau Finance Weekly newsletter. We dissect the critical data that mainstream media ignores, empowering you to make informed decisions to safeguard your family's wealth. You can sign up right now using the link in the description or by scanning the QR code on your screen. It costs you nothing. But in an economy designed to drain you, it could save you everything. And now, back to the asset strippers. This raises a critical question. If hundreds of thousands of dollars are being drained from each middle-class family, where is that capital ultimately flowing? The answer is that it's flowing directly into the pockets of corporate healthcare giants, real estate investment trusts, REITs, and private equity firms. Let's rewind to 2008. Private equity firms recognized that the aging baby boomer demographic represented a massive, captive revenue stream. They launched an aggressive acquisition spree, buying up nursing homes, hospices, and senior living facilities. Today, it's estimated that private equity firms own between 5% and 13% of all nursing homes in the United States, controlling over 1,500 facilities. They operate using a very specific and highly destructive playbook. It often begins with a sale-leaseback agreement. A private equity firm acquires a nursing home, encumbers it with massive debt, and then sells the underlying real estate to an affiliated REIT. The PE firm then uses the proceeds from this real estate sale to pay itself a colossal dividend. Meanwhile, the nursing home is now financially crippled, forced to pay exorbitant rent to the REIT while also servicing the crushing debt load the PE firm saddled it with. To make this impossible financial equation work, the nursing home must ruthlessly slash its operating costs. And in a nursing home, operating costs primarily means staff. A landmark, peer-reviewed study from the National Bureau of Economic Research analyzed the impact of private equity ownership on nursing homes. The results of their investigation are chilling. The study found that P ownership leads to a 3% decline in hours from frontline nursing staff. It also found that Medicare billings per stay increased by 19%. Most disturbingly, the patient mortality rate during a stay and in the subsequent 90 days is 10% higher at facilities owned by private equity firms. This implies a staggering human cost. An estimated 20,000 lives were lost as a direct result of private equity ownership between 2005 and 2017. State-level data confirms this terrifying trend. In Florida, an AARP study found that nursing homes acquired by private equity saw their average quality ratings fall from 3.4 to 2.9 stars, while direct care staffing hours decreased by 13% per resident. They are literally extracting wealth at the cost of human lives. The Carlyle Group's takeover of the ManorCare chain serves as a perfect case study. They acquired the chain, extracted $6.1 billion for their investors by selling off the real estate, and left the nursing homes burdened with $470 million in annual rent payments. 11 years later, ManorCare declared bankruptcy, owing $7.1 billion, while the private equity investors walked away with handsome profits. When the debt burden inevitably becomes unsustainable, these PE-backed facilities simply declare bankruptcy, leaving residents stranded and staff unpaid. In 2025 alone, at least 11 large senior care companies entered bankruptcy. And the REITs that own the land? They're thriving. Healthcare REITs like CareTrust saw their revenues increase by over 150% between 2021 and 2025. This is the true destination of the great wealth transfer. It is a direct pipeline from the middle-class family home to the balance sheets of Wall Street institutions. But the extraction doesn't stop at the nursing home door. The entire macroeconomic narrative of the United States is currently being distorted by this generational divide. If you look at the headline GDP numbers, the economy appears to be booming. In the third quarter of 2025, GDP grew at a robust 4% annualized rate. The S&P 500 is hovering near all-time highs. But this is a statistical mirage. The U.S. economy is currently being propped up almost entirely by the spending of wealthy, asset-owning retirees. This is what economists are now calling the K-shaped or bifurcated economy. According to Moody's Analytics, the top 10% of household owners now account for nearly half of all consumer spending. Because they own the homes that have doubled in value and the stock portfolios that are breaking records, they are experiencing a massive wealth effect. They are spending freely on travel, leisure, and dining. And due to their age, they are driving a monumental boom in healthcare spending. In fact, a staggering 97% of all new private sector job creation in 2025 was in healthcare and social assistance. The economy is indeed growing, but it is growing by servicing the wealthy elderly. Meanwhile, the working-age population is drowning. If you are a W-2 wage earner without significant assets, you are living in a completely different economic reality. Since early 2020, the Consumer Price Index has surged by approximately 24%. The average non-farm business worker is receiving an increasingly small slice of an economy that has largely boomed over the last 15 years. Low-wage workers actually saw their real, inflation-adjusted wages decline in the third quarter of 2025, the first non-pandemic drop since 2014. To bridge the gap between stagnant wages and exploding living costs, the middle class has turned to plastic. Total U.S. credit card debt soared to an all-time record of $1.277 trillion in the fourth quarter of 2025, and the pain is highly concentrated. Americans aged 30 to 59 now carry 132% more credit card debt than their older and younger counterparts. They are surviving on credit cards with average subprime interest rates exceeding 22%. In the lowest income zip codes, the serious delinquency rate has surged past 22%, meaning nearly 1 in 4 balances in those areas is 90 days or more past due. This disconnect is why we are experiencing a massive vibe recession, a phenomenon where official economic data looks positive, yet public sentiment remains deeply pessimistic. The University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index recently plummeted to 53, a catastrophic reading that rivals the darkest days of the Great Recession. The working class is being heavily taxed and squeezed by inflation to support a system that is ultimately pricing them out of existence. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the housing market. The family home is the final battleground for the great wealth transfer. As elderly Americans are forced to liquidate their homes to pay for care, or as they pass away, these homes are entering the market. But younger generations cannot afford to buy them. Nationally, an individual now needs to earn over $106,000 a year to afford a median-priced home at current mortgage rates. The average age of a first-time homebuyer has rocketed to a record high of 38. The homeownership rate for households earning above the median income is nearly 79%, while for those below the median, it is a dismal 52%. That is a 26-point chasm of inequality. So, if Millennials and Gen Z can't afford these homes, who is buying them? Enter institutional investors and corporate landlords. While their national share of home purchases may sound modest at around 2%, their local concentration is devastating. In markets like Atlanta, investors own 28% of all single-family rental properties. In specific zip codes on the periphery of Atlanta, institutional investors control more than 50% of all listed rental homes. This ceases to be a housing market, it more closely resembles a modern-day company town. And when investors acquire these properties, research from the Philadelphia Fed shows that they raise rents at rates 60% higher than the average increase. But the true endgame is a strategy known as build-to-rent, BTR. Wall Street's strategy has evolved beyond simply acquiring existing homes. They are now funding the construction of entire subdivisions purpose-built to be rental properties in perpetuity. There are currently around 110,000 single-family rental homes under development across the country. The pipeline for BTR projects is consolidating under a small number of dominant operators, with over $50 billion in institutional capital flowing into these investments since the pandemic. Build-to-rent is not merely an investment trend, it is the physical construction of a permanent renter class. Every subdivision built under the BTR model is a subdivision that will never produce a single homeowner. It is a neighborhood where equity is permanently extracted from the residents and funneled upstream to institutional shareholders. And here is the ultimate kicker. In January 2026, the Trump administration issued an executive order ostensibly aimed at stopping large institutional investors from buying single-family homes. It generated favorable headlines, but a careful reading of the fine print reveals the order doesn't actually ban anything. Crucially, build-to-rent communities are completely exempt. The very machine building America's permanent renter class has been given a free pass. So, let's connect the pieces. The narrative of a glorious generational wealth transfer is nothing more than a comforting fairy tale. In reality, the financial plumbing of the healthcare and housing markets has been perfectly engineered to intercept that capital before it ever reaches you. Your parents' home equity will be drained by a nursing home charging $127,000 a year. That nursing home will funnel its profits to a private equity firm that staff to service its debt. The family home will then be sold to an institutional landlord, who will rent it back to your generation at a 60% premium. All the while, politicians will claim the economy is booming because GDP figures are inflated by the healthcare spending of the wealthy. The government can quietly revise the numbers. They can point to a surging stock market. They can sign toothless executive orders for the cameras. But they cannot revise reality. They cannot revise the $1.27 trillion in credit card debt that is crushing the working class. They cannot revise the structural deficit of affordable housing. And they cannot revise the fact that the great wealth transfer will ultimately culminate in the largest consolidation of land and assets by the corporate elite in modern history. To survive this, you cannot depend on a promised inheritance. You must focus on acquiring hard assets, understanding legal firewalls like Medicaid trusts, and building wealth entirely outside of their rigged system. Good luck. But I want to hear from you. In your experience, is the great wealth transfer a total myth? Or do you believe there are still viable ways for families to protect their assets from the healthcare and private equity machine? Have you witnessed the impacts of institutional home buying in your own neighborhood? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching. This is Nick signing off, and I'll see you again soon.